do enough that you can start your draft it, and then go back and see where you need to research, because the rabbit holes are many and very deep.
Hello, I'm Stuart Wakefield, an Author Accelerator certified book coach and writer. With 26 years in theatre, broadcast media and coaching under my belt, I know what makes stories work, and I love to share that with other writers, because the world of storytelling, it's like the ocean. It's deep, it's mysterious, and it's a little bit scary to those who don't know how to navigate it. And with so much left to luck and timing, it's my mission to give great books the best chance of getting into readers' hands. In each episode, I'll share tips and plans of action that will help you write, edit, and publish your book. And if you're new to writing or consciously working to improve your craft, then this is the podcast for you. Another interview for you this episode, this time with historical fiction writer Margaret McNellis, with whom I've had the pleasure of working with on both a historical fiction novel that's being published May the 21st, 2024, and a romantasy. In this interview, we'll be talking inspiration, research, and what it's like to be coached. Okay, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really interested in, as with all writers, where ideas come from and how your writing journey kind of began. So I wanted to ask you, you write stories about identity, about transformation, about belonging. How did those things kind of begin for you in your writing life?
I mean, when I first started writing fiction, I was writing zombie fiction, which is the ultimate transformation, right?
True.
I got into historical fiction because I fell in love with Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. And I had always loved history. I had, by this point, completed my bachelor's in art history. So the past has always interested me. And I always kind of felt like I was born into the wrong century. So the past is where I feel like I belong. Okay. But bringing that to the page has always been exciting, because it's like I get to do the research, I get to delve into the world, and that felt more at home to me than zombie fiction. Not that you can't have zombies in the past. You can.
True.
There can be
Pride and Prejudice and zombies.
Exactly. That's how I got into Jane Austen, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
I love that.
So, the idea of identity and belonging and transformation, these are things that I have spent my whole life thus far thinking a lot about. They're things I've stretched toward in myself. And I would say that like the coalescence of those themes kind of happened at the same time as I was thinking of my Heroes of Sherwood series, and also learning about my birth chart, because my birth chart has certain things in it that kind of speak to these themes as well.
Okay.
Placements and relationships between the planets. And as it happens, the way that I've planned my Heroes of Sherwood series, it's kind of like book one is all about Alice finding belonging. Right. Book two is about identity, and book three is about transformation. Anything that happens after that, well, we'll just have to see. The three books that I planned kind of follow those themes.
Okay.
And when I realized that that was how I unintentionally built it, I was realizing that those were present in my birth chart as well as things that I like to write about.
Right. Okay. Now, I found it really interesting when you said about you feel you were kind of born in the wrong century, because your work actually spans much longer than that. So your forthcoming book, Daughter of the Seven Hills, is set in what time?
The mid to late 2nd century.
And what was it that attracted you to that particular era as opposed to your kind of Sherwood work?
Ancient and medieval have always been some of my favorites, both together. I've always marveled at the things people could create without modern technology and modern machines.
Yeah.
Right? Like when you look at what the ancient Greeks built, what the ancient Romans built, what the ancient Egyptians built, the ancient anybody built. The amount of things that I don't even know if we could build those things today.
Right.
You know, it's like we've got cranes, we have bulldozers, but they did it all through human and animal power, which sometimes water power, you know, moving things on rivers and stuff. And that absolutely amazes me. So I've always kind of been drawn to the further back in time, the better. And this particular story was born from a past life meditation that I did.
Okay. I didn't
Where
know that.
all that I saw in the past life was that I was a healer in Rome. That's it. That's all I got. But everything about the physician's stall in Rome in the early part of the story comes from that past life meditation. All of the sensory details I pulled from that. Everything else, when I was writing this book, it was the height of the pandemic.
Right.
It was spring of 2020, and everybody was scared about everything all the time, forever and always. And it just kind of like poured out of me in about 2 weeks, the first draft. My hands
2 weeks?
Yeah, 2 weeks.
Good grief. Okay.
Never done that before. Usually it takes me like 2 to 3 months to draft a novel.
I was going to say, that's NaNoWriMo on steroids. 2 weeks.
It is. It is. It was unpleasant for my wrists. I did not have a good physical experience with it. But I was definitely in a splint after that for a little while. But it was such a mess, the first draft. There were pieces of it that were written like plays, pieces that were just like little random snippets. It was just such like a word vomit draft. You know?
Right.
That it just it was so different from the draft that you saw because it was such a mess that it could not have like stood as a novel. But it got the story out. And in those 2 weeks, I was having a lot of dreams about it. A lot of dreams from my protagonist's point of view. So like her story was filtering in that way. So yeah, that one very much came from a fascination with the ancient world and also this past life meditation and dreams. It just kind of like fueled the story.
Okay. There are two things that have come out of that. I'm probably going to forget the second one while I ask you the first one. But and now I forgot the first one. No. So what I think the first thing I wanted to mention is just I'm very impressed that you were able to do a past life and not be a queen or a princess or somebody hugely important. It seems that everyone who does a past life, and I'm sure I'm generalizing this and I might get some hate or cancelled or whatever, but everyone seems to be like super, super important. Now, I'm not saying you weren't an important healer, but everybody seems to have like station, and you're like, I've never met anybody who like cleaned toilets in the 17th century. Yeah. So hats off for doing that.
So it's funny that you say that because another past life meditation I had, I came out of it and I was like, well, I was either William Shakespeare or his horse. And as I've thought about it more, I'm more and more convinced I was his horse because like all the viewpoints in that past life experience, like over his shoulder or like, you know, from like behind and above him.
I love that.
So I always, you know, like I think it's, first of all, I think that we all come from the same source, so we're all everyone technically, right. And it's just like what experiences we're tapping into. But I think that we have such an urge to be someone who broke ground that it's really common to latch onto that experience.
Yes.
But I think also there's so much beauty in the sides of history that are not written, especially as a writer.
Yes.
Like it's so much fun to take a story from a life that would have gone unrecognized thousands of years later and turn it into something. That to me is more exciting than being like, oh, I was Emperor so-and-so. So yeah.
Oh, all right. You might be able to help me with something then. So you did art history.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I'm putting you on the spot here, okay? But I'm pretty sure
it was a while ago, just so you know.
All right. Okay. And this might be something I have to Google later. But I'm sure I watched the documentary and there was a movement of artists who actually painted quite kind of mundane scenes, like people sweeping or
Yep.
cleaning or something like that. Are you familiar with that? Am I imagining that?
Yeah, no, it's a realist movement, and it's
Right.
just kind of like, let's just show people how people usually are, how most people usually are, right?
Yeah.
Not the 0.05% who live in palaces and commission paintings from us, and this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, always very interesting.
And I think culturally that we have this obsession with the kind of outliers, and I think
Yeah.
that's why publishing loves like debut authors and often, paints them as these kind of, wonder child kind of people.
Yes.
And that kind of celebration of the extraordinary, I find like really, really pervasive. And I don't know if that feeds into some of these past life things that go on, because I think in a way a lot of people are desperate to be special and the best of, and we see a lot of that in social media. So we were talking about identity and transformation. What do you think it is about writing in the past that allows you to explore that?
I think that it strips away a lot of expectations, those expectations of the modern world that are unique to our modern world. So it allows, for me, it allows me to get closer to the heart of the character a little bit more, because I feel like, and this is not true everywhere in the world today, but I grew up in America, and as most people in the world would consider, had a very privileged upbringing, because I didn't have to worry about having a home. I didn't have to worry about having fresh water. I didn't have to worry about having food, all those things, or clothes, or those things. Like, my family wasn't driving BMWs everywhere, but we did fine, So, so I grew up with this privilege, but writing about the past for me is a way to write a character whose stakes are a little bit higher, without writing things that are wholly disconnected from my story.
Right.
So if I'm writing about places that I'm ancestrally from, I feel like that's an okay space for me to write in about those situations. Whereas if I were to write in the current time period about those situations, I would have to write about someone else's story. And then I feel like I'm infringing on someone else's right to tell that story. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if I'm writing from my ancestry, it feels like I'm bringing to life something from my very distant past.
Yes.
So it feels honest, and I feel like I have a right to tell that. And when that happens, I can fully immerse myself in it.
Okay. And I think there could be something in there again around, I think the past kind of allows you to inform that sense of identity, because society is telling you who you are. Society is potentially stopping you from transforming.
Yes. And I love characters who are in between of the, like Alice in My Heroes of Sherwood. Her mother came from noble stock and her father's a peasant. So, these things, these arrangements did happen. They were rare, but like there were people who kind of like walked the line. Like Geoffrey Chaucer was not for those reasons, but he was in spaces where he was with the peasantry, and he was in spaces where he was with merchants, and he was in spaces where he was in court. Like, he had access to all of these spheres of the world, of his world. And I find that to be so interesting. And when someone is in that position, when either they have access to more than one sphere or their sphere changes,
right,
that's when their transformation becomes incredibly interesting to me.
Yeah, because I guess they're learning something about the other side.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that discovery of that. And then I'm working with a writer at the moment who's writing about, how much can I say? Okay. What I will say is, she's writing a Regency romance.
Love it.
In a particular moment in London that kind of puts the beau monde very much in the everyday kind of world. So they're trying to do something that I have to be so careful. They're trying to do something that benefits wider society. And by interacting with them and interacting with each other in a slightly different way, allows the transformation, obviously, not only of the heroine, but the hero. So, thinking about Daughter of the Seven Hills, you've got a slightly different take on that. So, how much can you tell us about the transformation of Aurelia?
Yeah, so she starts out as a patrician Roman woman in Rome, and through circumstances, she ends up traveling 1,000 miles or so to Britannia, and pretty much to where Hadrian's Wall is. She goes a little bit past it, and in so doing, she's got transformations on a few levels, right? Because obviously she's no longer in this patrician class, right? Because where she is, that kind of doesn't matter. And would be looked down upon. I'm imagining there's not a whole lot that we have written from people who were not Roman from that time period in that area that survived. So a lot of the story does come out of my own imagination and what I've learned about people of that area and what I think they might have thought. But that would not really have been welcomed. And it's kind of like, so what? Who cares?
Yeah.
If it's not going to get us a ransom, we're not interested. And she doesn't really want to be ransomed. She doesn't want to go back to the way life was, but she's kind of in this place of not really, for some of the time, being sure how she wants to proceed, where she doesn't know really where her place of belonging is. And for reasons that are in the story, she really can't go back to Rome. It's kind of off limits for her. So, she has to find a way forward, and the way that she thinks is going to be her way forward ends up not necessarily being what she thought it would be.
Yes.
And so she's kind of forced to remake herself a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the other major transformation that I wanted to explore with her character is her relationship to her slave.
Yes.
She has a very different view of their relationship than her slave does. And enslavement was popular in the ancient world. It was not uncommon, and it wasn't usually racially motivated, though sometimes it could be. In this case, and this is not something that's really spoiling much, her slave is another woman who should be Roman, not necessarily as in from the city of Rome, but from the Empire of Rome, and should have rights as a citizen and does not for reasons that are in the story. So part of Aurelia's journey is starting to see things through her slave's eyes and not only through her own. And in so doing, that facilitates her transformation a little bit as well. So that's another thing that I didn't feel I wanted to write from the enslaved character's point of view. I would not feel right doing that in a contemporary story.
Yes.
It would not feel correct, even though there are still people, unfortunately, enslaved all over the world. They don't tend to look like me, so I would not feel comfortable writing about that. But in the ancient world, it's a different landscape. I can explore that in a way that is not robbing it from someone else who should have the right to tell that story in the space to tell that story.
Yeah, I definitely feel like you've kept the authenticity in it, like the human aspect.
Thank you.
I guess she has a few transformations, and for me, they kind of happen in 3 phases. So there's the transformation I'm talking about in kind of periods of time.
Okay.
So for me, there was a kind of initial transformation that leads her to flee Rome, or actually, flee is a strong word. The decision to leave Rome. And then the transformation, the actual journey has on her.
Yeah.
And then the transformation of actually spending time in Britannia. So I want to just kind of back up and talk to you about kind of your vomit draft. Now, obviously, I'm a big hero of blueprinting books. What do you think the advantage versus the disadvantage of doing that kind of vomit draft without necessarily having a definitely clear, sense of where you're going?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I didn't know what the blueprint was when I did this vomit draft. Uh, I would say that the benefit is you get the story out. For me, if I'm going to draft that way, it has to be quick.
Right.
It has to feel like a whirlwind, or I'll get myself so turned around and confused because I won't know where to go next. It has to just kind of be like, it's happening before thought, that I'm just onto it. So the benefit is getting the story out, getting it on the page, having the clay to work with, so to speak. But you get that with the blueprint too. It's a different approach to it. Having blueprinted other books and blueprinted a book with you, a different one. I like that process better of doing a little bit of planning on the front side.
Okay.
Because what I had when I finished the 2-week vomit draft of Daughter of the Seven Hills was something that felt so disjointed. I almost didn't know what to do with it. I was like, okay, I have all these pages and they seem very overwhelming to me and I don't really know where to go with them. And like I said, they were all in different formats. Some of them were in, like I wasn't sure how I wanted the points of view to sound because this book has 4 points of view. So it was all over the place, even more so than the draft that you saw, which also had a lot of all over the place going on.
I'm saying nothing.
No, you can be 100% frank. It's totally fine. That draft had a lot of threads that didn't connect to anything because it was kind of like I wasn't sure yet which road was the one I wanted to follow.
Yeah, but I think the joy was it had a backbone.
Yes, it
which
did.
Some writers just don't have.
Well, yeah, it had gone through several drafts by then, and I had gotten feedback from MFA mentors on it, on what I was able to send them, because, there's a limit to how much you can send in a time period. And, what I discovered was that I kind of liked drafting when I wasn't planning, I kind of liked drafting in a play format because it was like, let's just get the dialogue out there. What are people saying to each other? And then I can go backfill.
Yes.
And figure out everything else. So it was it allowed me to just like move through it faster.
Yeah.
Like get that backbone out. But it felt, it felt right for the chaos of the time. I don't know that I would do it again. If another pandemic hits, God forbid, I hope not, I'll do another vomit draft, but I don't see myself using that way forward again. This was like I feel like it's very much a one-time thing.
Yeah.
Because what I had after was pure mess and chaos.
and I think there are writers who need to, get the vomit on the floor, and before they can clean it up. Yeah, exactly. And I absolutely respect there are writers to do that, and I think as long as they accept there is going to be a lot more work in pulling that back together, and certainly I've worked with people I know I've actually pulled them back into blueprinting, but because of that they have a firmer idea of the story in their mind, and they tend to get through the blueprint maybe a little quicker because they do have that kind of, at least not necessarily a visceral idea of where the story is going, but at least they've kind of got the basics.
Yeah, 100%. I totally respect people who can do that too.
Yeah.
I don't think it's for me long term.
Yeah.
Because part of it is too, when it's historical, it's like you have to adhere to some sort of timeline somehow.
Right.
To a degree, and like there's a amount of research involved.
Yes.
So when you're just spitting out the draft like that, I was making everything up. I'm like, I don't even know if this is correct. I don't even know if that person was on the throne at this time. Who knows? I don't know what's going on. So there's very much this feeling of I'm going to have to redo all this anyway. Right. So it might feel different for people who aren't writing historical stories, but for me, I don't think that is tenable as a future process or ongoing process.
So let me talk to you about historical research, because I came across something recently that, I wrote a book, Out in the Gold, which is 1880
That story of yours, by the way. Everybody go read it.
But more recently, I'm writing a story, certainly Edwardian era,
Mm.
1907 specifically. So I am, happily typing away and mention the radio, and I carry on typing. And I go back and do some historical research, and it wasn't a radio, it was the telegraph.
Yeah.
Now, some of this is set in a medical field tent. So at the time, telegraph was kind of fixed. So that then leads me down another path in that there were telegraph troopers. And it just started to get really, really kind of cumbersome. And I was starting to second guess the sources that I was getting information from. And I just dug and I dug and I dug. So in terms of, well, actually, let's talk about a kind of series of books. So your Sherwood series, how much historical fiction research were you having to do?
That one, so one, I kind of brought forward a lot of what I already had learned. I've been obsessed with the Robin Hood legend my entire life.
Okay.
So a lot of it was like things I already knew and was picking up. Some of it were, was things that like Robin Hood, to the best of our knowledge, or the figures who inspired Robin Hood didn't live during the First Crusade.
Mm.
So it wouldn't have been King Richard the Lionheart on the throne.
Right.
At all. So I decided to go with that because it's the most well-known version of the legend. And so right off the bat, I was in a world that was not when Robin Hood would have lived. But choosing which things to look at, I looked at a lot of like what general life was like at that time period, to the best that we know.
Yeah.
We're still learning about it today because for peasants, we only know so much, and a lot of it is assumption based on what was written by nobles and stuff, because most of the peasants couldn't write. Yes. So we don't have their firsthand take on a lot of things. We have to use other sources and cobble them together. So I took a course that I would recommend to anyone and everyone. It's in the great courses, and it's called The Other Side of History.
Okay. And
it goes from the ancient world, let's say, to the Industrial Revolution. It might not go quite that far. It might just be medieval, or the Renaissance, perhaps. But it's all about people who would not have been famous.
Oh.
And what their lives were like, and like what we know versus what we can suppose. And the lecture is excellent. I loved that course. It was fabulous. It was worth every second of my time to listen. So I always recommend that to people. So that's kind of was my starting point. And then I used other sources that kind of translated some more contemporary things. There's a book called The Year 1000 that I liked a lot. And this, of course, is not Alice's time period. It's almost 200 years beforehand.
Right.
But I used it to kind of see sort of like which things from before the Norman invasion might have carried over, which ways of life, which technologies, which ways of interacting together. And what I discovered was that a lot of the assumptions that I came into writing with were not really based on fact or what facts we have.
Okay.
So it was a lot of just kind of like getting a sense for what the world was like, getting a sense for what Alice's point of view might have been like, and less about nailing down specific facts, because like I said, I was already in the wrong time period for Robin Hood, so I was already making stuff up.
Right.
So it was more about getting a sense of her world and what that would have been like. So I used a combination of video lectures, of books, of websites. I always recommend that people do what they can to use as much information literacy as possible. If you're like, Wikipedia is a great place to start, but go much deeper than that.
Right.
I do use it sometimes to be like, wait, who was the leader, the child of, or whatever, just like if I need to get like, because I'm slightly dyslexic, so just getting my rulers in the right order. Sometimes I'll use Wikipedia for that because they link it, right? So you can just like click from one to the next. But yeah, it can be overwhelming, the historical research. My tip to anybody writing anything historical is do enough that you can start your draft it, and then go back and see where you need to research, because the rabbit holes are many and very deep.
Yes.
And you
I've
spend
learned.
years. Yeah, you can just spend years. And some things are going to take more to research than others. I remember when I fell in love with Pillars of the Earth, I wrote to Ken Follett to tell him that I loved his book. Because, my opinion matters that much to him now. But he was very sweet. He emailed me back within like 8 hours. And it
Really?
was this whole story about when he wrote his book and how long it took him. And he was very encouraging and like just a very down to earth response.
Yeah.
And it took him 10 years to write that book. Granted, that was a 1,000-page epic,
Right.
but it involved so much research. He had to basically learn how to construct a Gothic cathedral, which is amazing because he's writing characters who know how to do this. So he has to know. So his research was probably a lot more nitty gritty than mine.
Okay. Yeah.
Also, like I said, his book was a lot longer. It was probably the length of my entire series put together just for that one book. But yeah, it can be a lot. But if you just take it, just give yourself like that foundation, and then write the draft, and then go out and get the information you need, it speeds up the process a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's important to kind of get the story down, and then go back and see. Well, like the Telegraph is the perfect, my radio era. At least I got the story down. I had, people in a field tent getting information from the outside.
Yeah.
And as I say, I was quite happily writing about the radio. Realized it was the Telegraph, and I was like, okay, how am I going to fix this? So I moved them from a medical tent to a hospital.
Perfect.
Instead, so I had to kind of work. I think a lot of writing is really problem solving.
Yes.
So how did the research on the Sherwood series compare to the research you had to do for Daughter of the Seven Hills?
Daughter of the Seven Hills was a lot more research heavy, because when I wrote the Vomit draft, I was just making stuff up. I'm like, this emperor was on the throne and this was going on. And when I got to actually starting to pull it together, I realized that a lot of things that I had put in did not happen in the same time period.
Right.
And because it wasn't the story of a legend that was, a like amalgam of all these other people, I didn't feel like I had the freedom to really like do whatever I want, carte blanche, with these dates and these emperors and whatever. So I really had to like figure out, okay, I knew I wanted Hadrian's Wall to be there. I knew I wanted Marcus Aurelius on the throne. I knew I wanted there to be some kind of political concern for some of the characters. I won't say more than that.
Okay.
But and once I stripped away everything else, it was like, okay, within the realm of what really matters to me, what's possible. It's kind of like looking for an apartment, right? You write down like the really important stuff, and then everything else you'd like to have if you can. Right. So it was sort of like going through that process of what is actually really important for the story, and what can I reshape or get rid of or change or whatever. So having those things be true, what historical facts do I then need to hold to? And what am I comfortable changing? Like, everything that happens in Britannia is completely made up. It didn't, for what we know, it didn't happen at all. And I put that in my author's note. I'm like, this is made up. It's fiction, folks. Have fun. But, it's based loosely on some of the ideas of situations that are similar that happened before in the same place. So I had to research those, and then say, all right, how much do I want to nod to this versus go my own way? So there was a lot more figuring out, because I was dealing with more people who were really alive then, and they're like what was going, like I didn't feel like I could make up different things that the empire was doing. Right. Whereas in the Robin Hood series, King Richard in the first book, he's just on crusade. We don't ever see him in the first book. We see him in the second book, but and I adjusted where and when he is to make it fit the story.
Okay.
And then the author's note, like, this is what I adjusted. This is why. Right. It didn't fit Alice's timeline, so I moved where and when he was a little bit. He was there eventually. I made him go there a little earlier. So because I tend more toward historical fantasy, I feel like I have the right to do that as long as I'm letting people know.
Yes.
As long as there's a reason for it.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Like I know as a coach, I'm taught to be, like reading the manuscript and then go back and kind of make your comments. And as you know, I don't do that.
I love the way you do it, by the way.
Okay, thank you very much. But I'll spend, 25, 26 hours walking through a manuscript very, very slowly and making a lot of comments. I think my record is 1,600 and something. But, I'd like to get that kind of, for the author, to get that kind of reader's reaction to things, saying, my curiosity has piqued here. Is this going to pay off? And I know I picked you up on, I have a few examples about historical fiction and things that can come up.
Yeah.
So with you, I remember saying, you have a lot of people called Marcus. Like, I think you need to change that. And you very kindly came back to me and said, yeah, but this is how people were named in Rome. And I was like, okay, can you, like, how free, could you be with that? Like, how much artistic license can you take with that? And then I'm working with somebody at the moment, and they used the expression the Sierras. So I've gone on the internet, I looked it up, and I've gone back to him and said, well, this isn't a plural.
Yeah.
And then he came back and said, well, actually, I live there, and that is how people talk, because it's made up of a number of mountains. I'm like, okay, fine. I was reading a book, and this wasn't a client's book. This was, reading for pleasure. And it was set during the First World War.
Okay.
In the States. And they used the expression, no harm, no foul.
Okay.
Now, I don't know anything about what it was like in the US during the First World War, but there was something about that phrase that was bugging me. And I went and looked it up. And I don't think it was used until like the 40s or 50s. And at that point, I started to lose a little bit of faith in what I was reading.
Yeah.
And then, and I think my long way of getting into this is, I think if you can find somebody who's kind of well-versed in those things. So when I was writing Out in the Cold, that was it. It was set in 1886 in the Old West. And I happened to find a beta reader whose, thing was the Old West, and had studied it. So I was like, please, will you read my book? Like, I know it's not something you would probably be interested in, but can you just please read it for accuracy?
Yeah.
And she was fantastic. She came back with, well, actually, there would have been an ice house, and there would have been this, and there would have been a cellar where they kept vegetables, and like all of this would have happened, as well as all of the stuff that you've already researched. And for me, it was just fantastic to have that input from an expert.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing you wouldn't have had access to somebody like that. So do you find it more or less difficult to make those kind of decisions? And have you had any flack for something that you've written that somebody disagrees with on a factual level?
Yes and yes. So, yeah, it is more difficult because you feel like I've had people who are like, oh, I learned so much from this book, and I'm like, but it's a novel. Just like keep that in mind. And like,
yes.
I try to stress to people, this is fiction. I'm making stuff up a lot of the time. I try to do as much research as I can.
Yeah.
Not getting a PhD in every single one of these topics, though. Exactly. So we're just kind of doing our best here. And wherever possible, I've gone to best resources that I possibly can.
Yeah.
Short of hiring an archaeologist or an anthropologist. I do watch a lot of documentaries about archaeology and anthropology. Like there's this one show called Mystic Britain that I absolutely love. It can be a little hokey sometimes, but
Okay.
I absolutely love it because they talk about about things that are mysteries from the past in Britain. So I'm like, this is the best thing ever. But it's I think having taken, so when I was in my art history major, I had to take a historiography course, which really kind of helped me as a writer because it taught me basically how to research history. And so that has helped a lot. But yeah, there's still times when I'm making stuff up and I'm like, I hope this is okay to make up. And a lot of times if it's a big thing, like, yeah, I'm moving where King Richard was for a time because I want to, and the story needs it. Then I'll put it in the author's note because it's like I'm making this change for a stylistic reason or a plot reason or whatever. Okay. So I like to let people know those things when they happen.
Okay.
Especially if it's like a big thing. So that has reduced flack. Most of the people who've come back to me have been in the alpha or beta reading stages. So it's been like, help you with this. Like, as an example, and this just cracks me up every time I think about it. Suzanne Dunlap, who we both talked with a lot before, she's another book coach, fabulous writer. I adore her. I love her work. She was kind enough to do a beta read on The Red Fletch for me. And unbeknownst to me, I didn't even know this about Suzanne at the time, but she, growing up, had tons of horseback riding experience.
Okay. I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
Right.
She did dressage and like all of that stuff. Like she knows horses, right? And I love horses. I rode them as a kid, but not in any official capacity, right?
Hey,
like,
you used to be one.
Exactly. Like it was like a week of day camp, or when I was, I want to say it was like in the late 2010s. I was mucking out stables at a woman's house in exchange for riding her horse, but I wasn't like getting lessons.
Right.
Just sort of like get up there and have a good time,
Yeah.
So I was never formally taught. And there was, Suzanne came back to me and she said, I want you to know several times you mentioned the word withers, and I don't think it means what you think it means. She was like, it's not really possible for Alice to hold on to the horse's withers in this way. Withers are their shoulders, and I think you mean like the end of the back of the mane. And I was like, that is exactly what I mean. So I was able to fix that. So I was very grateful for that. The only other time it happened was a misunderstanding, I think, in a review I got of that book, where the person who was reviewing the book did not agree with my description of the decor inside the sheriff's castle.
Oh.
But if they'd read the author's note, just saying, they would have seen it was a choice made on purpose. They thought it should have been all tapestries and not any shields or weapons hanging on the wall. And there are tapestries, but there are also shields and weapons hanging on the wall, which is a choice I made to emphasize the sheriff's martial prowess and attitude.
Right.
And it was fine. It's not a big deal. These things happen. But they called it out as being historically inaccurate. I was just kind of like, no, I know, but...
Do you feel like you want to go after people like that? Do you feel like they're just being petty?
Initially I felt that way, I think.
Right.
But since then I was just like, meh, what are you going to do? First of all, there's the whole thing where it's considered deeply unprofessional to do so you kind of can't.
Okay.
Second of all, well, like they're not going to change their review because I said that. What would be the end point of this? It is what it is, And the other thing is, I firmly believe that once we publish a written work, it's no longer just ours. Obviously, the copyright is, etc. I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but the interpretation of the reader becomes just as important. So if they miss that, then that's their experience of it. So who am I to say their experience is wrong? I've never had somebody like come at me hardcore about
Right.
historical stuff. Um, and maybe that's because it's something that I call out in the author's note where I'm like, I'm changing things. This is fiction. And I do that in almost every book because I don't really want to have those conversations. I honestly, like, once the book is published, I don't want to have those conversations. If someone feels that something is not accurate, they can certainly feel that way. They can bring it up, but I'm not going to go back and like change a whole book because of it. I firmly believe once a book is done, it's done. I'm not going to. No one book is like who we are as a writer for a whole career.
Yeah.
But I can look at a book and I can say I did my best with that. At the time, the person that I was, the writer that I was, I did my best with that. And to be any other way, I think is very unhealthy as a writer. To berate ourselves for past works. I mean,
I really want to rewrite my first book.
Don't, no, it's just,
yeah, but what I'm worried about is when somebody reads, so when the third book in the trilogy comes out, what I've been trying to write for 11 years, I'm worried that people will say, oh, like, I'll go back and read the first one.
They might.
No, I don't want you to. It's badly written. It's full of sex that I don't really do anymore. And I'm ever so slightly ashamed. But on my website, on my writing page, it does say, like, when I look back on this body of work, some of it's cringy, but at least I can see my growth as a writer over a period of time. And I think we do forget sometimes to actually give ourselves credit for even becoming writers in the first place and having the courage to put things out there. Because as you said, the moment you put it out there, it's for somebody else. And I think that's where these kind of fandoms grow from.
Yeah.
And this feeling of ownership. And particularly we see it, in things like the newest Star Wars films. Mm-hmm. There's this huge uproar from, people my age who grew up with them, who hate them. But I know some kids who love episodes 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah.
Whereas they were largely savaged, by the Star Wars community. So, I really like that acknowledgement. So you mentioned your BA in art history, but you also have an MA in English and creative writing and an MFA in fiction.
Yes, I do.
So my question is, by doing those courses, how do you feel that they affected your writing?
Oh, well, the MA in English and creative writing gave me such an appreciation for language and how it's changed over time, because it was, so that program was in part fiction writing, in part linguistic study, and in part literary theory. It was like all three of them combined. And it helped me understand how language has shaped and grown and how it continues to change, mm-hmm. and how we can use it in fiction to convey things that are maybe between the lines, subtextual stuff. It helped me understand how readers respond to text. I had to learn reader response theory, which was absolutely fascinating.
Oh, how's that different to narrative theory? Because I really struggle with narrative theory.
Yeah. Reader response theory is like narrative theory, but from the reader's point of view.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes. I'll go and learn that instead.
Yeah. I think you'll have fun with it. I think you'll have fun with it. And with the foundation of narrative theory, it's going to help you with the reader response theory as well.
Okay.
And then it was a lot of just starting to learn how to actually shape fiction. It was just like, let's throw a bunch of mud at the wall and see what sticks. It was like, no, let's intentionally shape this story and this character and all of that. And then the MFA for me, it taught me so many great things. One of the things was to play in writing, not to be afraid to just like let the constraints go and write for fun sometimes.
Good, yes.
Yeah. And I've gotten stories out of that. I'm just going to see where this goes. And I'm like, oh, wait, that could be something. And it also taught me, how to, take something that might be meaningful to other people and present it on the page in a story. Like how to it was kind of like taking what I knew from reader response theory and how to actually make that connection with the reader, and how to be an author in the sense that, like, you're writing for a reason, right?
Yes.
So that's about when I started to think about, well, what am I actually writing about and why? Like, why do these matter to me? And I had an excellent mentor who tried so hard to teach me about the connection between the internal and external beats, but it did not gel until I got to the inside outline. He tried so many ways, and he was so good. He was really excellent. His name is Mitch Wheeland. He actually runs a really cool program in Boise, and it combines an MFA in fiction and an MFA in film studies. Like, into one. It's so cool.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. And his writing is brilliant. He's amazing. I just, I didn't know at the time that I needed the inside outline tool to kind of make that click in my brain.
Right.
Like, there's so many writing tools and methods out there. It's like sometimes you just need the right one that's going to make it turn over in your head. But I learned a lot about the hero's journey through him. And, I worked with him for 2 semesters back to back. He was absolutely phenomenal to work with. I feel so fortunate to have had the input that I had from the people there. I mean, everybody, all the faculty members were great. But that's where I learned how to use metaphor and, go deeper into subtext and all the things that give a story more layers. I think I learned from my MFA program.
Okay, that's really interesting. And then having gone through, so you were talking about the inside outline, which for listeners is part of the blueprint process. And you and I worked through the blueprint process on your work in progress, Hearts of Iron and Gold, which I thoroughly loved, because it's set in a period of time and an aspect of time that sparks my plugs, is the way I like to describe it. So how did you find, you've done your word vomit on Daughter of the Seven Hills. How did you find the blueprint experience on Hearts of Iron and Gold?
Transformative for me and the story. I mean, when I came to you with that story, I had already written about 90 pages of what I thought I wanted it to be.
Right.
And I got into the blueprint, and as I was doing it, it started to shift.
Yes.
And it's actually become a retelling. And it's become a romance. And it's like, it's such a different story, but it's so much stronger. Before it was still in the stage of like, wouldn't it be cool if, which I think is a lot of places stories begin. And that's a great place for a story to begin.
Yeah.
But it lacked that backbone, that I had with Daughter of the Seven Hills, where everything else was a mess except the backbone. I feel like Hearts of Iron and Gold, I had a message I wanted to send, but I don't want to ever be pedantic about it. You want people to experience it and internalize in their own way. And so it didn't have that backbone of like, how's that actually going to happen? And working the blueprint with you, that it gave it that. It's kind of, you asked so many good questions. And the other thing I liked about it was it really double checked my world building.
I had many questions.
And it was awesome. You were so curious about it, and it helped me simplify, because I also tend to overexpand things too much, make them too complicated a lot of times in world building. And so it really helped to have you there saying, well, like, how's this going to work? What about the timing of that? How are you going to bring this into it? And like, what's that going to be called? And why are they doing this? And like, it really forced me, as I was blueprinting, and particularly once we got to the inside outline and I was constrained by number of pages.
Yes.
It was like, I need to simplify this beast. There are too many things going on at once. And it really helped with that. I'm very excited for where the story is headed now because of that.
Good. And I find the inside outline, you were talking about uncovering stuff, and we talk about the muddy middle.
Yeah.
And I like to think of the inside outline as a tool you can use to basically get the mud off, whatever it is that you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Like the shiny brooch, or, like anything that's like that. And it does feel a little bit like archaeology, and learning what the flesh and the muscle to strip away so you do see the bones of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've had a lot of people,
I
you know, when I've worked on the inside outline or the outcome outline or the impact outline, depending whether it's fiction, non-fiction, or memoir, and I explain to them how it works, and they look at me like, "Oh, well, that's going to be really easy."
Yeah. They
And
think so at the start, don't
yeah,
they?
and then 2 weeks later, it's like, "How are you getting on?" And it's like, I hate this thing. It's like it's making me ask all the questions that I don't really want to ask myself.
Yeah.
And you know, it does enable you to have that conversation about why.
Yeah.
Well, why? And
Definitely.
what's the effect of this thing? Like, how does that resonate to the rest of the story? Um, you know, so we talked about blueprinting and how that helped. And I am, you know, really glad it helped with Hearts of Iron and Gold because I think it's a little gem.
Thank you.
So now you're able to put it in a setting.
Yes.
So then, how do you find the development edit kind of process in general for sort of Daughter of the Seven Hills?
I mean, that was brilliant because when I came to that one, I knew that the draft had promise, but I felt like it was still very disjointed.
Right.
It wasn't the hot mess that it was original, but it was still a mess because I had tried to bring a lot of things together, and I had, like I said, threads that were just kind of. It's like when my mother quilts. It's like when she first does a quilt, you know, before she trims all the extra threads, or a weaving where they're just like hanging out there being crazy, and it could come undone at any minute because they're loose. So I had all these loose threads, and I wasn't sure which threads were important to me to follow when I sent you that manuscript. And when you sent it back and I read through your comments, it was like speaking to the things I knew were true, but I hadn't known how true they were.
Right.
You know, so like when we had our conversation about it, I felt like it was a lot of just um, asking really good questions and also verification of like, where does the story actually need to go? What's actually important? And um, it was really, really helpful, especially when it came to, Aurelia's romantic experiences, which I won't get into because I want to leave those for the story.
Good. Yes, I quite agree.
um, but it really helped because it was sort of like it took all those threads and wove them back in. Like it braided them back into the story, the ones that needed to be there, and the other ones just like, let's clip them away.
Yeah.
They don't have to be there. So it was sort of like shining a light on the story. You know, it wasn't things couldn't like hide in the shadows anymore.
Yeah.
Like let's talk about all of it. And if memory serves, I think you left 800 comments on my manuscript.
Maybe.
It was awesome. I did not expect that, and it was so great to see where your thoughts were as you're reading through from someone who knows story, but also someone who can, like I said, I really think you're going to love reader response theory, but someone who can understand how the reader might be reacting as they go through, even if they don't know story. So it was like getting both at the same time,
yeah,
which was awesome, and then also getting encouragement along with it, like. You know, you're not afraid to call out, this is the part I really like, or this really stuck with me, or, you know, this was moving or whatever. So it's like you get all of those layers in one, and then the letter and call on top of it to kind of coalesce it on like where are we really going with this? So it was really, really instrumental in my rounds of revision that followed. Because I could go through your letter and, you know, fix the big stuff first,
right.
which nixed some of the small stuff that was an issue. Because some of it meant taking things out or adding new things in, etc. But it was really, really helpful to me because it allowed me to get to a place where after I did those revisions following your evaluation, it didn't feel like a mess anymore. Then it was just kind of like, now we're in a place where we can start to clean this up.
Okay, good. Well, you know, I'm glad you had good experiences, you know, with both of those. But you know, at the risk of it being the Mutual Appreciation Society, you know, I have to say that it was just really wonderful to work with a client like you because you do know story, you understand it, and you were open to the feedback that I was able to give you. you were able to, particularly in the blueprinting process, you weren't kind of fixed on one particular thing. And I mean, personally, I loved it when you had that breakthrough, because you had that breakthrough on the call.
Yeah.
And just to see your little face light up, and you're like, oh, this is what I'm writing. And it was just seeing that thing like ping. And then from then on, I mean, you were just like, I mean, when you came back and did I think it was your second draft of the Inside Out line, you were so excited. And there was so much energy, and your Inside Out line made so much more sense. So, I just want to thank you for being an awesome client.
Oh, thank you, Stuart.
You know what? I've been really lucky, and I think I've only sacked one client. So, and it was done amicably, but I don't want to be paid. I could take someone's money and just tell them their manuscript is great, but I don't feel comfortable doing that. And also, I don't think somebody should be wasting their money doing that either. So, yeah, thank you, because you made many aspects of my job a lot easier.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, if I can give advice to any writer working with any book coach, it would be come to it with an open mind, because it could blow your mind. The places your story can go that you might not have thought of yet. And just like, even if your coach is saying something that you didn't expect, take time and sit with it. You've paid for that feedback.
Yeah.
Make the best use of it that you possibly can, because there's a reason they're saying it to you. There's a reason that's coming up. And there were times on the calls that Stuart asked me questions, and I was like, I don't know the answer yet, because magic. But like, I knew I had to come up with an answer. I knew I had to figure it out.
I remember that because magic.
I say it all the time now. I'm just like, happening because magic. So it's kind of become a catchphrase.
Yeah.
But I loved it so much because you saw things that I had not looked at it that way in a long time.
Right.
So you were seeing it with fresh eyes. You were seeing it in such a thorough and very curious way. And all right, so I don't know if you know this, Stuart, but I'm obsessed with Ted Lasso. I've watched it a billion times. And now I need to follow Crystal Palace because it's the team AFC Richmond was based on. Like that's my reason for being a fan of that football club.
Okay.
Which is probably the most ridiculous reason, but that's okay. But there's a scene in Ted Lasso where he's talking about the importance of being curious.
Yes.
And it's one of the things that I loved working with you about for both of the projects that we've worked on together, is because you are so curious that it's like, I know no stone is going to be unturned in your curiosity, because it's like you'll ask it. I trust that you'll ask it. And I think there's something so beautiful in that, because when you can trust someone to give you their honest curiosity, it's like the places that your story can go are just, it's endless, and you just get to choose the best one that's most fun to write.
Yes. Yeah. And also, it's not me that has to work it out. I'm trying to ask the questions that help you work it out.
Exactly.
And again, that's great, because, you work it out and I get paid for it. No. But
the money's well worth it. The investment's definitely well worth it.
But there's a reason that it takes, 9 to 12 months to, to do the training and be certified and, be held to Author Accelerator standards. And, considering there are only 155 of us out there in the world.
I think it's a little bit higher now, but
okay.
It's not much higher than that of current certified coaches. Full disclosure, Stuart and I both work for Author Accelerator. We work together on the same team. That's why we're talking about this.
So we are trained to certify other coaches, and we do. If we don't think they meet the standards, then we very kindly to ask them to do revise some of their work and resubmit it to us. And we're not out there trying to get people to fail. We want people to get certified, and we give them the support they need for that. Having said that, I don't know how many developmental editors are actually kind of qualified, like, you know, who watches The Watchmen.
Exactly.
So yeah, you know, for me, it's been a really rewarding experience with you.
Same. I would recommend anybody work with Stuart. And he told me when we set up this interview that it was not for the purpose of services, but I'm going to do it anyway. All you need to do is go look at my testimonials on his website to see what kind of experience we had together. But I would recommend Stuart to anybody, and I would happily work with Stuart again. Like it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
I love you, Margaret.
I love you too.
Okay, so let's get back to Daughter of the Seven Hills. How long do we have to wait for it to come out?
May 21st, 2004.
Oh, that's not long.
No, it's coming up.
Okay, and then you're doing any like online events, like launch stuff that we can look forward to?
I am going to put a launch event together online. I haven't done it yet. I'm going to have an in-person event, which might have an online component yet. I'm not sure. Where I'm going to be at a shop called House of the Triple Moon in Essex, Connecticut on June 8th, signing books. We're letting it go a little bit further so that people can get their copies and stuff. Yeah. And yeah, I'm going to put together some events. I'm on social media. You can find me there. I was going to try and escape social media, but I can't yet.
It's a necessary evil these days.
It is. But come talk to me. Make it less evil. Yeah. So I will put an event up on my website. I haven't decided when. It'll probably be on the 21st of May, so that it coincides with the publication day. And it might just be like let's hang out and talk about ancient Rome and ancient Britannia and all those things.
I'll be there.
Awesome.
I can't promise I'm going to dress up like a Roman centurion, but hey.
There's no pressure. There's really no pressure.
I might have a hat with fabulous red feathers, but I can't.
Oh, that's cool.
I can't promise any more than that.
That's cool. I have hats from my first two books too. I have
really?
Yeah, I have a crown.
That's so adorable.
And then I have a huntsman's hat, which I can't reach right now.
Okay.
And things that I've done when I've been in public talking about those books is I like to ask people, are you a rebel or a royal? And then they get to like take their picture with one of the hats.
That's awesome. I mean, and that's something that you just sparked on. I know I don't know. I'm conscious I'm holding things up, and this is a podcast. But so my book that I'm writing that's set in 1907, I did get a copy of Speaking Made Easy: Speeches and Toasts, How to Make and Propose Them. That was published in 1907, and I have to say, there's something about it, having it in my hands or by me, that I find strangely, even the smell of the pages, right? There's something about this book that kind of grounds me in the area. And this might be a bit weird, I have even bought a box of detachable collars.
Nice.
That men wore in 1907. And I've also been able to track down the owner and the house by the address on the front. Sadly, the owner is not with us anymore. But, I'm able to find the house and see the kind of houses that people lived in there. And it definitely makes a difference to me to have objects from those times around. So, yeah, whether you write with a hat on or write with an old book next to you, I can definitely recommend it. I know we all write differently, but that's definitely something that's really helped me. Right, so 100%. Daughter of the Seven Hills, May the 21st.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to read it and read your author's notes.
Thank you. This one appears at the beginning because there are some trigger warnings for this book. There's a lot of dark stuff that happens in this book. With thankfully less dark stuff after you and I worked together. You're like, popping this off, and I'm like, no.
Well, listen, Margaret, it's been an absolute pleasure to work with you and an absolute pleasure to interview you today. Thank you, for sparing me time, because I know you're working on Hearts of Iron and Gold, and I don't really want to take away from that.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you again. Take care.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Before I wrap up, I invite you to do all the usual stuff. You know the drill: like, review, share and subscribe. But better than all of that, come and visit me at thebookcoach.co. You can sign up for my free self-editing guide and take a look at the services I provide. But there's tons, and I mean tons, of free useful stuff on my blog too. So, as you're developing a story or trying to revise one, it's difficult not to get stuck in the weeds, whether it be historical research or getting your story down on the page. And I thoroughly recommend you seek out the services of an Author Accelerator certified book coach. Get in touch with me using the email address stuart@thebookcoach.co. Yes, that's .co and not .com. And I'll tell you how to find the right book coach for you. And who knows, that might even be me. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I'm conscious there are a lot of podcasts out there, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to mine. But also, well done for investing some time in your own writing life. And yes, this podcast is about writing, but I'm here for you, not just your stories.